The wind had a cruel way of whispering truths on the high plains of Wyoming territory. It curled around the chapel rafters that morning like it knew something the rest of them didn't, like it pitied the girl with the pale veil and the trembling hands. Her name was Clara McRae, and she stood alone beneath a bower of chokecherry and pine, her bouquet already wilting in the dry sun. The church was a modest thing, more timber than plaster, raised by a town that barely clung to its own name, Grady's Hollow. Men had cut the wood with hands raw from rail work, and women had brought in blue quilts to soften the pews. It smelled of cedar and candle wax, of borrowed hope. Inside, everyone waited. The pastor fidgeted with his collar, whispering to his wife. Clara's father stared down the aisle with a set jaw, white-knuckled on the back of the pew, and Clara, alone in front of them all, watched the door that never opened. Jesse Markham was supposed to walk through it, handsome in a feral way, with eyes like burnt molasses and a voice that could smooth a horse or a quarrel with equal ease. He'd come to town 2 years prior and swept Clara off her feet with whiskey laughter and promises that spun like gold threads in the lamplight. No one ever said what Jesse ran from. He worked hard, smiled easy. That had seemed enough. But that morning, the sky stretched empty, the town square hushed in disbelief, and Jesse was gone. They waited an hour, then 2. Someone fetched coffee, another a shawl. Clara refused both, her hands never unclenched from the stems of her bouquet. Wildflowers, she'd picked them herself that morning near the creek where she used to wade as a girl. She'd hummed as she gathered them, soft hymns and scraps of lullabies, thinking of a future with cupboards full of sugar and a porch that faced the sunrise. When she finally turned from the altar, the veil slipped. She didn't cry. Her father's arm braced her, but she shook him off gentle, walking past the rows of faces with the slow grace of a funeral procession. Back at the house, her mother had already stripped the white bunting from the porch rail. She was a practical woman who loved hard and quiet, but even she couldn't stop the glass pitcher from shattering in the sink when she thought Clara couldn't hear. Her father slammed the shed door so hard it rattled the chickens from their roost. Grief has many tongues. Clara climbed the stairs to her room, the one she'd meant to leave behind. She peeled out of the dress, careful not to tear it, and hung it by the window. The afternoon light caught the lace like it might lift it into heaven. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long while, fingers absently brushing the petals from her lap. She thought she might feel fury or shame or even heartbreak, but it wasn't any of those that came to rest in her chest. It was a kind of stillness, terrible in its weight. A knowing that the story she'd been writing in her head was gone, burned up in some fire she didn't see coming. 3 days passed. People came by with pies and casseroles and tight-lipped condolences. She thanked them, accepted nothing. Jesse's things were still in the room he'd rented above the mill, but no one had seen his horse since the night before the wedding. Sheriff Amos didn't bother to look too hard. Men left. That was just a truth out here. Sometimes they had reasons. Sometimes they didn't. Clara spent most of her time in the barn, currying the mule or splitting wood with her father's axe. She didn't speak much, but when she did, it was clear. Clean sentences like water from a spring. She didn't weep, not where anyone could see. It was on the 6th day that the drifter came. He arrived near dusk, walking, with a rifle strapped to his back and a limp that told of a long story and a worse ending. His coat was torn and dust-cloaked, his face half covered by a wide-brimmed hat. He looked like someone used to being overlooked. He paused at the edge of Grady's Hollow, taking in the town like a man counting exits. Then he walked slow, steady, right into the middle of it. Clara saw him from the barn door, wiping her hands on a rag that had once been her mother's apron. She watched the way he moved, how his eyes didn't flinch when the wind stirred the dust around his boots. He passed the saloon, ignored the stairs. He passed the chapel, then he stopped, turned, looked straight at her. For a breath the air held. Then he nodded once, like a man tipping his hat to a storm, and Clara, without knowing why, lifted her chin in return. She didn't know his name. He didn't ask for hers. But something old and aching stirred between them, like a promise neither had made but both already knew. She stepped back into the barn. He kept walking. And the wind carried their silence down the hollow, soft as a prayer that hadn't yet found its words. The drifter's name was Eli Calder, though no one in Grady's Hollow learned it right away. He rented the corner stall in the livery stable and laid his bedroll on the hay, declining a room at the boarding house with a quiet shake of his head. He didn't ask for work, but by morning he was shoveling the smithy's hearth, and stacking lumber behind the general store. Folks paid him in stew, coffee, a place by the stove. He accepted without fuss. He spoke little, and when he did, his voice carried the gravel of far roads. He moved with the caution of a man who'd once trusted the wrong silence. His left leg dragged faintly, like it remembered a bullet even when his body tried to forget. Clara noticed he favored the east end of town. He didn't drink, didn't linger near the saloon like the railroad men or the gamblers who passed through with sharp boots and sharper eyes. Instead, he'd sit on the chapel steps when the light faded, watching the horizon as if it owed him something. She didn't approach him, not at first, but she watched. She noticed how he tied his boots with a sailor's knot, tight and square, how he fed scraps to the three-legged dog that haunted the mercantile stoop, how he mended a broken wagon wheel with a bit of leather and a split nail while the miller cursed behind him. Eli didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply worked. Clara felt the stillness in her begin to shift. A week after he arrived, he came to her father's homestead, hat in hand. Her father, Angus McRae, was a man of few words and fewer friends. When Eli offered to help with the spring planting, Angus studied him like a knot in good wood, something that might hold if handled right. Why, he asked, just that, one word. Eli's eyes didn't waver. Better to keep hands busy. That was enough. By sundown, he was driving fence posts into the thawing earth while Clara scattered seed. They didn't speak, not beyond what the work demanded. But in the rhythm of that labor, something small and tender began to settle. Not fondness, not yet, but familiarity. The kind that grows between people who have both lost things and don't ask each other to name them. Clara's mother watched from the porch, darning socks with stiff fingers. "He's got the look of a man with nothing to lose," she murmured once. Clara, brushing dirt from her skirts, replied, "Maybe that's the only kind who stays." By April's end, Eli was a fixture, not quite friend, not quite stranger. Children ran past him without fear. The grocer nodded to him without suspicion. He repaired a leak in the chapel roof without being asked. Still, he never went to service. It was a warm Sunday when Clara finally spoke to him beyond the work. He was sitting by the creek, carving a bit of driftwood with a dull blade. She came without a reason, carrying a tin of biscuits and an old canning jar filled with honey. "Figured you hadn't eaten," she said. Eli looked up, eyes shadowed under the brim. He didn't smile, but he took the offering with care. "Thank you." She sat beside him. The creek was low, trickling over smooth stones. Cottonwoods leaned close, their leaves whispering secrets. "You always drift like this?" she asked after a while. He considered, "Not always, used to ride for a purpose." "And now? Now I ride." She nodded. There was no accusation in her tone, just the curiosity of someone who had stood in the ruins of her own plans and was learning to ask questions again. They shared the biscuits in silence. The honey caught the sunlight like amber. A bee circled, then veered off. Eli glanced at her then, truly looked. "You were the girl in the dress," he said, not a question. Clara didn't flinch. "I was." He set the tin down. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For the leaving." She tilted her head, studying him. "You didn't do it." "No, but I know the sound it leaves behind." That night Clara lay awake listening to the wind in the chimney. She remembered the sound of Jesse's laughter and how it never quite reached his eyes. She remembered the way Eli's hands shook just once when she passed him the honey jar. Both men haunted her, but only one of them still stood in the light. Spring passed into a soft summer. Rain came late, but it came. The garden rose green and stubborn. Life stitched itself forward in small, stubborn pieces. And always Eli was there. Quiet, steady, not asking, not retreating. A presence like the mountain's edge on the far horizon, unchanging, even if you never reached it. Clara began to hum again while she worked. She didn't know what it meant, not yet, but she knew it wasn't grief. Not anymore. The prairie wind softened in July, brushing through the wheat fields with the hush of something gentle, not yet finished. Grady's hollow leaned into the season like a horse into its bridle, worn and ready. The days stretched long and the nights breathed warm. By then, Clara and Eli worked together without need for words. They knew the weight of each other's silences, how to pass a tool without asking, how to read a shadow in the cornrows and know it meant blight or worse. She still hadn't asked where he came from. He still hadn't asked what she'd been left with. One evening, as the sun spilled gold across the fields, Angus handed Eli a battered revolver. "Found it in the barn. Belonged to my brother before the war chewed him up. Figured you'd keep it cleaner than the dust does." Eli held the weapon like it might burn. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Clara watched from the porch. She saw the way his thumb lingered on the grip, how his jaw tightened. She knew that kind of memory, the kind you carried not because it was dear, but because forgetting would be a betrayal. Later that week, they rode out to mend a break in the northern fence, where the hills sloped like the backs of sleeping animals and the wind always smelled of sage. Clara rode bareback, her skirts hitched, unbothered by how she looked. Eli didn't stare. He didn't need to. Halfway there, thunder rolled from the west. They reached the break just as the sky darkened to pewter. Clara was up on the top rail, hammer in hand, when the first drop struck her brow. She looked to Eli. He tilted his head, reading the clouds. "We won't make it back dry." "Think we'll make it back at all?" she teased. His mouth twitched. "I'd wager." They didn't. Rain fell sharp and fast, the kind that soaks through to the bone in minutes. They took shelter in an old hunting lenta tucked against a bluff, the roof half collapsed but dry enough to shield them. She wrung her hair out and laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in near a year. Eli stood just inside the threshold, steam rising from his shoulders. His coat was heavy with rain. She reached for it. "You'll catch chill." He hesitated, then shrugged it off. She hung it on a bent nail, close to the fire pit. They built a small blaze, more smoke than heat, but it lit their faces in flickering amber. Outside, the world ran silver with rain. "I thought I'd marry by the time I was 20, Clara said suddenly, eyes on the flame. Eli didn't answer. "I used to think it meant something, being chosen." Now he turned, his voice low. "It does, but it's not everything." She met his gaze. The firelight made his face seem younger, or maybe just more human. Less shadow, more bone. "I thought I had to be someone new to deserve peace," he continued. "Turns out peace don't ask for much, just presence, just staying." The rain eased by morning. They rode back soaked and laughing, boots squelching, hair tangled. Angus raised a brow but said nothing. That night Clara found a small carving on the porch rail. A sparrow, etched crude but earnest, wings half spread. Eli didn't mention it, neither did she. The next day brought trouble. A rider came in from the east, dust-covered, bruised, trembling with the kind of urgency that silences a town. Bandits had hit a farmstead 2 counties over, left nothing but scorched walls and stories. Grady's Hollow braced, men polished rifles, women pulled children close. Old wounds stirred, the kind that never fully healed out here. That night Clara found Eli sitting outside the barn, revolver in hand. He was cleaning it with a care that bordered on reverence. "You're thinking of going," she said. "I'm thinking they might come here." She sat beside him. "You could leave." He didn't look at her. "I could. But—" He sighed, "But I'm tired of leaving." She didn't touch him, but her hand settled near his on the step, close enough to feel the tremor in his fingers. "You don't have to stay for us," she said. He finally met her eyes. "I'm not staying for us, I'm staying for you." It wasn't a promise, it wasn't even a vow, just a truth, plain and raw. And for Clara, who had once stood at an altar with a heart full of borrowed dreams, that truth was more sacred than any sermon. By August, the air grew thick, and the locusts screamed from the cottonwoods like they were trying to outrun time. Grady's Hollow moved slower beneath the weight of heat and fear. Word came that the bandits were drifting westward, closer, their trail littered with ash and broken things. The town met in the chapel, the only place big enough to hold all the voices. Windows thrown wide, candles sweating wax, children sleeping against knees while the grown talked in hushed urgency. Clara sat beside her father, Eli on the other side. He didn't speak until he was asked. "What would you do?" Sheriff Amos said, voice rough from too many years and not enough victories. Eli ran a hand along his jaw, eyes dark as river mud. "Set up watches, keep folk inside after dusk, bored the north ridge and locked the rail spur. "You sound like you've done this before," someone muttered. Eli didn't answer. They followed his advice, not because they trusted him, not yet, but because he spoke with the certainty of a man who'd seen what happened when you didn't prepare. So the town braced itself. They hammered shutters, buried valuables, laid rifles across doorframes, and they waited. During the waiting, life twisted on. Clara found herself waking earlier, rising before the rooster, baking bread not because she had to, but because the smell of it steadied her. She brought the first loaf to Eli. He ate in silence, then tore a piece off and handed it back to her with a nod like thanks. No words. She noticed how he watched the sky each evening, counting the clouds like old friends. Sometimes she joined him, their shoulders near enough to sense each other's breath. Neither of them said what lingered between them, but it grew all the same, quiet and durable. On a dusky Sunday, he asked her to ride with him. "Where to?" "Old Mining Road, place I scouted, might be a fallback if it comes to that." She saddled her mare without hesitation. The trail was rough, sun-baked, dotted with sagebrush and mule deer scat. They rode in silence until the path climbed to a ridge that overlooked the valley, Grady's hollow small and stubborn below, ringed by amber fields and thin pine. Clara dismounted, stepping to the edge. "You think we'll have to run?" she asked. Eli stayed on his horse, reins slack in his grip. "I think some things are worth standing for." She looked back at him. The wind tugged her braid loose, strands licking her cheek. "You think this place is?" He hesitated. "I think you are." Her breath hitched. He looked away, jaw tight. She crossed to him slowly, her boots scuffing stone. When she reached his side, she placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to mean it like that," she said softly. "I do," he replied, and there was no bravado in it, just truth. Just a man who had held too many ghosts and was learning the weight of the living. The wind shifted. He touched her hand just briefly, not a grasp, not yet, but a tether maybe. They rode back as dusk swallowed the hills, and she felt something old in her finally turned toward light. 2 days later, it happened. The alarm bell rang out sharp and sudden just before midnight. Fire bloomed on the ridge. Shadows moved fast, 3, maybe 4 riders, whooping, shooting into the dark like devils come to claim what the earth had spared. Men scrambled from their homes, rifles raised. Eli was already in the street, revolver holstered, eyes scanning like he could see through the dark. "They're testing the edge," he said, "seeing how we spook." Sheriff Amos barked orders. Clara stood on her porch, shotgun in hand, her mother beside her, pale but steady. Eli turned to her. "Stay inside." "I won't hide behind lace curtains while others bleed," she said. His jaw clenched. "Clara, I've already been left once. I won't be helpless again." He nodded just once, and that was the end of it. The next night, they came harder. Shots cracked against the store. A lantern spilled in the feed shed. Horses screamed. Eli and the sheriff held the line, backed by every able soul. Clara took her place at the chapel steps, watching the children huddled beneath the pews, her shotgun across her lap. She wasn't shaking. When it was over, one bandit lay dead, another wounded and vanished. The rest fled into the trees. Dawn came slow and smoky. The town was bruised but not broken. Clara found Eli at the edge of the field, blood on his sleeve, a crease at his temple. She knelt beside him, hands trembling as she reached for his wound. "I thought you might not come back." His eyes met hers, soft and feral all at once. "I didn't plan to go." She pressed her brow to his shoulder. He didn't speak, but his arms came around her and the embrace wasn't fierce, wasn't desperate. It was reverent, like touching something he didn't know he deserved but hoped might stay anyway. September crept in like an old dog, slow, stiff with memory and faithful. The fields goldened, the wind cooled, and Grady's hollow breathed easier. The bandits had not returned. Word spread they'd ridden south after easier prey. The town patched itself quiet. Boards came off windows. The chapel's bell, silenced during the worst of it, tolled again for morning service. Children played in the dust like no guns had ever barked in the night. But folks walked with a new kind of hush in their steps, the kind that came after survival, after witnessing what held and what didn't. Eli stayed. No one asked him to, no one had to. He kept working, fixing roofs, mending fences, teaching the miller's boy how to ride. He still slept in the loft, still rose before the sun. But now there was a rhythm between his days and Clara's, a cadence they never spoke of but carried all the same. She caught herself watching him more often, not just out of curiosity, but for the comfort of knowing he was still there. A shape on the horizon, a weight at her side. Her father noticed. Her mother did too. Neither said much, just moved aside when Eli came to supper, passed him cornbread without asking. Clara never wore the wedding dress again. She left it hanging by the window until the sun bleached it bone pale. Then one morning, she packed it away in a cedar chest at the foot of her bed and shut the lid without ceremony. Eli found her in the barn that afternoon, repairing a hinge. He handed her a drink and leaned against the post, watching her work. "You thinking of leaving?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I think I'm done drifting." She wiped her brow. "And if you're done, what then?" "I stay." She looked up. "You sure?" His eyes were steady. "You asked me once if I always drifted. Truth is, I used to look for reasons to. Now I look for reasons not to." Clara set the hammer down. "And have you found one?" "I have." She didn't smile, not right away, but her hands reached for his, calloused and strong and scarred. She held them like proof, like something real. That night, he didn't return to the loft. He stayed on the porch beside her, beneath a blanket, shoulder to shoulder. They didn't speak of love. They didn't name what grew between them. But as the stars wheeled overhead, she rested her head against him, and he let out a breath like he'd been holding it for years. The next week they built a fence line together around a patch of land that had long been fallow. He marked the corners. She sowed the seed. They didn't call it theirs, not yet, but they walked it each morning, checking for fox prints, clearing weeds, side by side. In town, folks said little. They nodded, offered pie, lent tools. That was how they gave their blessing in Grady's Hollow, quietly through presents. Winter came early. Snow laced the roofs by late October. Clara pulled the heavy quilts from storage. Eli split firewood, built a shed. One evening, as frost climbed the window panes, he brought in a cedar box. Inside it were a pair of gloves, too small for his hands. "Made these," he said, setting them on the table, "for you." Clara picked them up. The stitches were uneven, the leather worn but warm. "You learning to stay properly now?" she asked, teasing. "I'm learning what stays with me," he said. She stepped to him, took his face in her hands. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Neither are you." Then she kissed him, not with urgency, but with the depth of someone who'd waited long enough to know what she wanted. And in that kiss was every vow she'd never gotten to speak, every promise that didn't need an altar or an audience. Come spring, there would be a garden in that field. Come spring, there might be rings or not, but already there was home. Not the house, not the land. Him, her. A life slow-built, quiet as snowfall and strong as the roots beneath. And that was enough.